Prologue. 4 o'clock in the morning wasn't a good time to be thinking about torture. Ben Ryder's mind had come to the subject circuitously from thinking about the stranger sleeping alongside him, the man whose blonde hair was sliding silkily through his fingers as he stroked it, the man whose warm, lean length was pressed entirely to him. Thinking about this stranger had led Ben to think about the difference between the person he'd believed him to be, an aloof, austere diplomat, and the man he actually was, the man Ben had discovered him to be, Alexei Primakov. What things had Alexei Primakov done in his life to lead him to this place? Ben knew some things now, a little about his childhood in Denmark, more about how he'd come to England on an assumed name and stolen life. What about the time between? Trying to fill in this gap had led Ben to think about torture. He knew a little about Spetsnaz training. Know your enemy and all that. Regular Spetsnaz officers were trained using the theory of empty barrels. The deeper you dragged them down under the surface, the harder and faster they rose. But sometimes these men were dragged so far down into degradation and pain, they were in danger of bursting from the external pressure. There's only so much dignity you can strip from a man in training before all he can think about is suicide or murder. Consequently, every Spetsnaz officer left training with a vast charge of malice ready to discharge like lightning from a thundercloud. And these were the regular officers. Ben was also aware of the others, the ones more fearful, whose reputations still scarred the terrible mountains of Afghanistan. These were the interpreter officers, the intelligentsia of special forces. Fluent in many languages, the man breathing softly against Ben's ear would have been an ideal candidate to join this specialized group within the most elite of the vast Soviet army. But perhaps it wasn't his skill at languages, his education, and his intelligence that had suited him to the interpreter officers, if indeed he'd been one. Perhaps it was the knowledge he'd gained surviving for 5 years as a teenager in Soviet prisons. After all, it wasn't every man who could calmly drive nails into an enemy's head to extract information, split tongues snake-like to terrify, fill lying mouths with hot coals to encourage truth. Had this man done that? And what, Ben reflected, did it say about him that only a few hours ago he'd told this man that nothing he ever did or said would drive him away? That even if that bolt of malice discharged against him, and he was killed, he'd return from death still wanting. He tightened his arms around the sleeping man and returned to his thoughts about torture. He suspected he wasn't as skilled in the art as this man, but if the meeting in the morning went wrong, there wouldn't be a thundercloud big enough to contain his malice. Torture? It was the least of the things he'd now to do to keep this man safe. And his.